So we've been talking about New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's pleas for medical supplies as both local and hospital officials around the country are clamoring for the distribution of vital medical resources to frontline medical providers that will literally make the difference between life and death. Joining us now, Associate Professor at the Columbia University Business School and an expert on hospital operations management, Carrie Chan. Also with us, member of the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committees, Democratic Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin of Michigan. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Congresswoman Slotkin, I guess, first of all, what's the word from the front lines in your district and how they're doing in the fight against this virus?
Yeah, I would say we are hearing a pretty strong cry from our healthcare workers, our first responders, that they just do not have the personal protective equipment that they need to keep themselves safe and to keep themselves on the front lines. There's a real hierarchy of needs coming in, you know, and all the calls and all the emails we're getting. That is number one, and getting people through this period of the next few weeks where the orders for equipment aren't yet in, but we've got to get through this next period. And then obviously next down the ladder is the economic impact and just the absolute, you know, concern from people on how they're going to get by and get through this period. That's what we're hearing. And we hear pretty amazing stories of the folks who are sharing masks, you know, nurses who are sharing masks, people who don't feel like they have the equipment they need and are coming home to their families. So I think it's important to think about this as sort of a different type of conflict. And the people on the front lines are very different than the conflict we're used to. We need to recognize that and treat them the same way we would treat our frontline active duty military in a different conflict.
Jonathan Lemire.
Carrie, my question for you is, we just talked a lot about the plight of the situation in New York City and how things are going to only get worse. In fact, we had a lengthy discussion about the situation in New York last block. And I'll point out, minutes later, the president tweeted a defense of his handling of the city, of his situation here. We saw that Governor Cuomo yesterday at the Javits Center, which is a convention center that they're turning into a makeshift hospital. Can you sort of address, this is your area of expertise, how quickly can that be turned into something that can actually help patients? How thorough is the treatment there? Will that be to just sort of handle the other patients and so the hospitals can focus on coronavirus? What's your sense of what actually can go on in what is legitimately a massive space, but how useful will it be?
Right. So I think that this expansion is certainly going to help New York City. We are going to be able to treat patients separate from the COVID disease. And so this is going to help alleviate some of the strain on our hospitals in the city. Unfortunately, as we know, the city's hospital systems are already very strained. And so while this is going to help, you know, we need to do more to continue to enable our frontline providers to give care. And also to put them in a position where they are not overwhelmed and they're able to have the resources available to treat their patients.
Congresswoman Slotkin, what are you hearing? I mean, I know you're hearing the cry for help, for supplies from healthcare workers, but what is it going to take to actually get the supplies in place in places like your district? For example, is there anything the president could do to speed up the process?
Sure. I mean, I just co-authored a bill that we dropped yesterday that basically tries to force the president to implement the authorities he has under the Defense Production Act. He's announced it. The FEMA director has made some remarks about how they're using it, and then he's contradicted. The president needs to centralize the production, and in particular in the retooling of some of our big manufacturers. A lot of these folks, like especially our big autos in Michigan, our suppliers, they're doing this on their own. They're deciding to retool to make this protective equipment, but it really needs to be organized. And again, that equipment is what we're looking to come in 2, 3, 4 weeks from now. So we want the president to move on that. And frankly, I worked on a lot of crises when I was at the Pentagon. I under almost no circumstances, would recommend the legislative branch forcing the executive branch to enact these powers and tell them how to manage. But this is just a situation. It's just the outcry is so strong that it's pushed us to do this, to try and force the president to centralize the retooling of our big manufacturers.
Susan Del Percio.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We need to have the leadership and the coordination to get the products out for the end user. And it's interesting listening to the Congresswoman. It seems so clear and so obvious, and I don't understand why the president at this point hasn't been able to see it. It's so stark what needs to happen. But again, when you're only looking at things as political problems, and through your, what helps yourself, it makes it much more difficult to get things done for others. But I just also want to go back to how Andrew Cuomo has presented those facts. I wrote a piece, as you mentioned earlier, calling him America's governor. And the reason why he has been successful in that is because he is able to present facts, information, trends, what's going to need to be done, and lastly, compassion. And when we have a president with no core values and you cannot trust, he cannot lead.
Right. But the missing piece of that with Governor Cuomo is the mobilization from the presidential level. Carrie Chan, thank you. Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin, thank you very much as well.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.